The gunshot that ended Marshal Daniel Crawford's life echoed through Preston Lawson's mind every night for 3 years, a sound that never faded no matter how much whiskey he poured down his throat or how many miles he rode across the Nevada desert. It was April of 1882, when Preston rode into Hawthorne, Nevada, a man hollowed out by guilt and grief, searching for something he could not name in a town that seemed as forgotten by God as he felt himself to be. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street as Preston guided his weary horse toward the livery stable. Hawthorne was a mining town clinging to life, its population a mixture of prospectors hoping for silver strikes and families trying to scratch out honest livings in unforgiving territory. Preston had no intention of staying long. He never did. Staying meant people asked questions, and questions led to conversations he was not prepared to have. He was 28 years old but felt decades older, his face weathered beyond his years, his dark eyes carrying shadows that sleep could not erase. His black hair needed cutting, and his clothes showed the wear of constant travel. Preston had been a deputy once, proud to wear the badge, proud to ride beside Daniel Crawford, the best lawman Nevada had ever seen. That pride had died alongside Daniel in a bank robbery gone wrong, when Preston's moment of hesitation, his split second of fear, had cost his mentor everything. The livery stable was run by an older Mexican man who took Preston's horse without much conversation, which suited Preston fine. He paid for a week's boarding, though he doubted he would stay that long, then headed toward the only hotel visible on the street. The Desert Rose Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days, its paint peeling and its sign creaking in the hot wind that blew down from the mountains. Inside, the lobby was mercifully cooler, shaded from the brutal afternoon sun. A woman stood behind the desk, and Preston found himself stopping mid-step, caught off guard by her presence. She was perhaps 24 or 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, though loose tendrils framed a face that was both lovely and strong. Her green eyes met his with a directness that was rare, assessing him without judgment, and when she smiled, it reached those eyes in a way that suggested genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. "Welcome to the Desert Rose," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he could not quite place, something Eastern perhaps. "You look like you have been riding for days. I am June Kelly and I run this establishment." "Preston Lawson," he replied, approaching the desk. "I need a room." "Just yourself?" June asked, already turning the registration book toward him. "Just myself." He signed his name, his handwriting cramped and unpracticed. "How much for the week?" $6, includes breakfast each morning. June watched as he counted out the coins. "We serve dinner in the dining room as well if you are interested. Nothing fancy, but it is hot and filling." Preston nodded, pocketing his change. June handed him a key, her fingers brushing his briefly, and he felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. It had been so long since he had felt anything beyond the numbness that had become his constant companion. "Room 7, top of the stairs and to the left," June said. "If you need anything, I am usually here or in the kitchen out back." "Thank you, madam." Preston took the key and headed for the stairs, feeling her eyes on him as he climbed. He told himself it meant nothing. Everyone stared at strangers in small towns like this. It was natural curiosity, nothing more. Room 7 was small but clean, with a bed that looked more comfortable than most he had slept in over the past 3 years, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a window that overlooked the street. Preston dropped his saddlebags on the floor and sat heavily on the bed, the exhaustion of endless travel suddenly overwhelming him. He should clean up, maybe get some food, but instead he found himself lying back and staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town filtering through the thin walls. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the usual nightmares. He saw Daniel's face, saw the bandit's gun rising, saw his own hand frozen on his weapon, too slow, always too slow. He woke in a cold sweat as the sun was setting, his heart hammering against his ribs, and knew that lying in this room would only make things worse. The hotel's dining room held perhaps a dozen people when Preston made his way downstairs. He chose a corner table, positioning himself so his back was to the wall, an old habit from his lawman days. June appeared moments later with a plate of beef stew and cornbread, setting it before him with that same warm smile. "You look like you could use this," she said. "I make the stew myself, my grandmother's recipe." "Smells good," Preston managed, and it did. He realized he had not eaten since the previous morning. June lingered for a moment, and Preston sensed she wanted to say something more, but another customer called for her attention. He ate slowly, tasting the food properly for the first time in memory. It was good, rich and hearty, seasoned with care. Around him, the other diners talked and laughed, families and miners sharing their day's events, and Preston felt like a ghost observing the living, separate and untouchable. He finished his meal and returned to his room, but sleep would not come. The walls felt too close, the air too stifling. Near midnight, Preston found himself dressed and walking out into the cool desert night, seeking the space and silence that the hotel room could not provide. Hawthorne was quiet at this hour, most of its inhabitants long since retired. Preston walked without direction, past darkened storefronts and homes where lamplight flickered in windows. He ended up at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland, and the vast expanse of the Nevada night stretched endlessly before him. Beautiful, is it not? Preston spun, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his hip, only to find June standing a few feet away, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. She held up her hands in a peaceful gesture. "I apologize, I did not mean to startle you," she said. "I could not sleep either. I saw you walking and thought you might like company, but I can leave if you prefer solitude." Preston's heart was still racing, but he forced himself to relax. "You should not be out here alone. It is not safe. Neither should you by that logic." June moved to stand beside him, looking out at the moonlit desert. "Besides, I have lived here for 2 years. I know this town and its people. The dangerous ones are usually drunk and passed out by this hour." They stood in silence for a long moment, and Preston found it was not an uncomfortable quiet. June did not press him with questions or idle chatter. She simply stood there, breathing in the night air, and something about her presence eased the tightness in his chest. "Why could you not sleep?" Preston heard himself ask, surprising himself with the question. June glanced at him, considering. "Memories, mostly, thoughts that circle like vultures when it is dark and quiet." She paused. "What about you? The same?" Preston's throat felt tight. He had not talked about this, not to anyone, not in 3 years. But something about this woman, about the way she listened without expectation, made the words want to come. "I used to be a deputy," he said quietly, the confession emerging before he could stop it. "In Silver City." "That was 3 years ago." June said nothing, but she shifted slightly, her attention fully on him, and Preston found himself continuing. "My Marshal Daniel Crawford, he was the best man I ever knew. Fair, brave, dedicated to justice. He took me on when I was 23 and stupid, thought I knew everything. Daniel taught me what it meant to wear a badge, to serve people, to uphold the law with integrity." Preston's hands clenched at his sides. "There was a bank robbery. 3 men, heavily armed. Daniel and I responded. It happened so fast. Daniel went through the front, told me to cover the back. I heard shooting and I froze. Just for a second, just one moment, but it was enough. By the time I got inside, Daniel was on the floor, bleeding out, and the bandits were gone. His voice cracked and he stopped, breathing hard. He had never said this aloud, never put words to the guilt that ate at him every waking moment. "He died in my arms," Preston continued, his voice barely above a whisper. His last words were telling me it was not my fault, that I was a good deputy, that he was proud of me. But he was wrong. It was my fault. If I had been faster, braver, if I had not hesitated. "Did you catch the men who did it?" June asked softly. "Yes. A posse tracked them down 2 days later. They resisted arrest. None of them survived." Preston laughed bitterly. "I was not even part of the posse. I had already turned in my badge. I could not wear it knowing what a coward I was." "So you have been running ever since," June said, and it was not a question. Preston turned to look at her fully. "What do you know about running?" June pulled her shawl tighter around herself. "More than I care to admit. I came to Hawthorne 2 years ago from Boston. I was engaged to a man there, a wealthy merchant's son. Everyone said it was a perfect match. He was handsome, successful, from a good family. The wedding was planned, the invitations sent." She paused, her eyes distant. "Then I discovered he kept a mistress, had kept her throughout our entire courtship. When I confronted him, he laughed. He said this was how men of his station conducted themselves, that I should be grateful he was willing to marry me at all, that once we were wed I would be provided for, and what else could a woman want?" Preston felt anger kindle in his chest on her behalf. "You called off the wedding." "I did. My family was furious. They said I was throwing away my future over masculine pride and foolishness, that I should be practical. My father told me if I went through with breaking the engagement, I would no longer be welcome in his house." June's voice was steady, but Preston could hear the old pain underneath. "So I took what money I had saved, bought a train ticket west, and ended up here. I used my savings to purchase the desert rose from a widow who wanted to return east. I have been running it ever since, building a life on my own terms." "Do you regret it?" Preston asked. "Some days," June admitted. "Mostly I miss my mother and my younger sister. But no, I do not regret refusing to marry a man who did not respect me, or building something that is truly mine. The loneliness is hard, though. I do not fit with the other women in town. I am unmarried but not looking for a husband, independent but not wealthy, educated but working with my hands. I exist in a space between worlds." Preston understood that feeling more than he could say. They stood together in the darkness, two people carrying burdens they had not chosen, finding unexpected companionship in the Nevada night. "Why did you follow me out here tonight?" Preston asked after a while. June smiled slightly. "Because I recognized the look in your eyes. I have seen it in my own mirror often enough. The look of someone carrying weight that is crushing them, someone who desperately needs to talk, but has no one to listen." Something cracked open in Preston's chest, a dam he had built so carefully over 3 years, suddenly showing fractures. "I do not know how to stop seeing it," he said, his voice raw. "Daniel's face, the blood, knowing I could have prevented it. Every town I ride through, every lawman I see, it all reminds me of what I failed to do, who I failed to be." "Have you ever considered that you might be holding yourself to an impossible standard?" June asked gently. "You were in a dangerous situation. You were afraid. That is not cowardice, Preston. That is being human. A lawman cannot afford to be afraid." "A lawman who is never afraid is a fool who will get himself killed," June countered. "Fear keeps us alive. It is what we do with that fear that matters. You did not run away. You went into that bank. You held Daniel as he died. You have been punishing yourself ever since for a moment of human hesitation in a situation where most men would have run entirely." Preston shook his head. "You do not understand. Daniel trusted me. He depended on me to have his back. And you did. You were there. The men who killed him are dead. Justice was served. But Daniel's death was not your fault, Preston. It was the fault of the men who chose to rob that bank and shoot a lawman." June moved to stand directly in front of him, her green eyes intense in the moonlight. "How long are you going to keep running from ghosts?" "I do not know how to stop," Preston admitted, and saying those words aloud felt like standing naked before her, every defense stripped away. June reached out slowly, giving him time to pull back, and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and strong, calloused from work but gentle in their grip. "Maybe you start by staying in one place long enough to remember who you are beneath the guilt. Maybe you start by talking to someone who will listen without judgment. Maybe you start by forgiving yourself for being human." Preston looked down at their joined hands, feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope, fragile and terrifying, but unmistakably there. "I do not know if I can." "You do not have to know right now," June said. "You just have to be willing to try." They walked back to the hotel together, still holding hands, and Preston felt the darkness that had been his constant companion for 3 years lift ever so slightly. When they reached the lobby, June squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "Thank you," Preston said, "for listening." "Any time," June replied, and he could see she meant it. "The desert is beautiful at night. Perhaps we could walk again tomorrow if you are still here." "I think I might be," Preston said, surprised to find he meant it. That night he slept without nightmares for the first time in 3 years. Over the following days, Preston found himself settling into Hawthorne in a way he had not settled anywhere since leaving Silver City. He would help June with repairs around the hotel, fixing a loose board here, mending a broken shutter there. She would insist he take meals with her in the kitchen, where they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Preston told her about his childhood on a ranch in California, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his father's death when Preston was 15, and how he had worked odd jobs for years before finding his way into law enforcement. June told him about growing up in Boston society, about the suffocating expectations and rigid rules, about her love of books and learning, and how her independent spirit had always chafed against the role women were expected to play. "I wanted to go to college," June confessed one evening as they sat on the hotel's back porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I wanted to study literature, maybe become a teacher or even a writer. My father laughed when I suggested it. He said education was wasted on women since we would only marry and have children anyway." "You are clearly educated," Preston observed. "You speak well. You run a successful business." "My mother secretly paid for tutors," June said with a fond smile. "She never said so explicitly, but I think she had dreams of her own that were crushed, and she did not want the same for me. She made sure I learned mathematics, literature, even some Latin. My father thought I was just receiving instruction in music and needlework." Preston found himself smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in memory. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is. I write to her when I can, though I have to send the letters to my sister, who passes them along secretly. My father still refuses to acknowledge my existence." June's voice carried old pain but also acceptance. "I hope someday he will soften, but I cannot live my life waiting for his approval." "No," Preston agreed. "You cannot." They fell into a comfortable silence, and Preston realized he was happy. The revelation was startling. He had not thought himself capable of happiness anymore, had not thought he deserved it. But sitting here with June, watching the day fade into night, he felt something close to peace. "Preston," June said after a while, her voice hesitant. "May I ask you something? Anything? Do you think you might stay in Hawthorne? Not forever necessarily, but longer than you originally planned." Preston turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her expression, the fear of rejection. "I have been thinking about it," he admitted. "I have been running for so long I am not sure I remember how to stay, but I would like to try, if there is a reason to." "What if I was a reason?" June asked quietly. Preston's heart began to race. "June, I am not sure I am someone you should want in your life. I am broken in ways I do not know how to fix." "We are all broken in some way," June replied. "That does not make us unworthy of connection, of caring about each other. These past few days, talking with you, spending time together, I have felt less alone than I have since coming here. You understand what it is to carry burdens, to feel like an outsider. You listen when I talk, really listen. That is rarer than you might think." "I feel the same way," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "Talking to you, it is like I can breathe again, like maybe I am not beyond redemption." June reached over and took his hand, the gesture now familiar between them. "You were never beyond redemption, Preston. You just needed someone to remind you of that." Preston turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "I cannot promise I will not have bad days. The guilt, the memories, they are not just going to disappear." "I am not asking for perfection," June said. "I am just asking for honesty, for you to let me in, to let me be someone you can talk to when the darkness gets too heavy." "I can do that," Preston said, and meant it. "I want to do that." They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, hands clasped. Two wounded souls finding solace in each other's presence. Preston knew there would be difficult days ahead. Knew his demons would not vanish overnight. But for the first time since Daniel's death, he felt like he had a reason to face them rather than run. The weeks that followed brought changes both subtle and profound. Preston took a job at the livery stable, helping care for the horses and repair equipment. The physical work was satisfying, and the stable owner, a taciturn man named Joseph, asked no questions about Preston's past. The pay was modest but enough to cover his room and board with a little left over. More importantly, Preston and June grew closer with each passing day. They would walk together each evening after the hotel duties were finished, talking beneath the vast Nevada sky. Preston found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone, moments from his childhood, his fears and dreams, the deep well of loneliness that had driven him from town to town. June listened to all of it without judgment, offering her own stories in return. She told him about the night she left Boston, about sitting on the train with her meager possessions and watching the city disappear behind her, terrified but also exhilarated by her freedom. She told him about the first month in Hawthorne, when she had nearly failed, when the hotel had been falling apart, and she had no experience running such a business. But she had been too stubborn to give up. "I scrubbed floors until my hands bled," June said one night as they sat by the creek that ran along Hawthorne's eastern edge. "I learned to cook by trial and error, burned more meals than I can count, but I refused to fail. I refused to prove my father right, that I could not survive without a man to take care of me." "You have done more than survive," Preston said. "You have built something remarkable. The Desert Rose has a reputation now. I heard miners in town talking about it, saying it is the best place to stay within 50 miles. June blushed, pleased. "That means everything to me, not just the success, but knowing I did it myself, that I took a risk and it paid off." Preston understood that pride, that need to prove oneself capable. He was beginning to feel something similar, though his journey was different. Each day that he stayed in Hawthorne, each day that he chose to remain rather than run, felt like a small victory against the guilt that had controlled him for so long. One afternoon in late May, Preston was repairing a fence at the livery when he heard raised voices from the street. He set down his hammer and walked over to investigate, finding a crowd gathered near the general store. At the center stood a man in a marshal's badge from the neighboring county, arguing with the town's elected sheriff, an older man named Williams who was generally regarded as competent but unambitious. "I am telling you, we need men for a posse," the marshal was saying. "The Dalton gang hit a mine payroll transport yesterday, killed 2 guards. We have been tracking them and they are heading this direction. I need able men who can handle themselves in a fight." Preston felt his stomach clench. The Dalton gang was notorious. 5 brothers with a string of robberies and killings across Nevada and California. This was serious law work, dangerous work, and Preston's instincts were screaming at him to volunteer. But those same instincts had led to Daniel's death. He started to turn away, to return to the safety of the livery, when he caught sight of June standing in front of her hotel, watching him. Their eyes met across the distance, and Preston saw understanding in her gaze, but also a question. Who was he going to be? The man who ran, or the man who faced his fears? Preston's feet carried him forward before his mind had fully decided. "I can ride with you," he heard himself say. The marshal looked him over critically. "You know how to handle a gun." "I was a deputy in Silver City for 3 years." "Why are you not still?" the marshal asked, suspicion evident. Preston forced himself to hold the man's gaze. "Personal reasons, but I know how to do the work." The marshal studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We ride in an hour. Bring your own horse and weapons." The crowd dispersed, and Preston found June at his elbow. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "I think I do," Preston replied. "Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to prove something to myself, that I can face danger without freezing, that Daniel's faith in me was not misplaced." June looked worried but nodded. "Then be careful. Come back to me." The simple possessiveness of those words, the assumption that he was hers to come back to, made Preston's chest tight with emotion. "I will," he promised. He kissed her then, in full view of anyone who cared to watch. A quick press of lips that nevertheless conveyed everything he felt and could not yet say aloud. June's hand came up to cup his cheek briefly before he pulled away. "I will be back before you know it," Preston said, then turned to prepare before he could lose his nerve. The posse consisted of 7 men, including Preston and the marshal, whose name was Robert Garrett. They rode hard through the afternoon, following tracks through increasingly rough terrain. Marshal Garrett proved to be experienced and level-headed, which steadied Preston's nerves somewhat. "The Daltons are smart," Garrett told the posse as they paused to water the horses at a creek. "They will have lookouts, probably have an ambush planned if they know we are following. We go in careful and coordinated, no heroics." Preston nodded along with the others, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. He could feel fear curling in his stomach, but it was different from the paralyzing terror he had felt 3 years ago. This fear was sharp and clarifying, keeping his senses alert. They found the Daltons' camp just before sundown, tucked into a rocky canyon with good cover. Garrett positioned the posse carefully, with 3 men including Preston circling to block the far exit while he and the others approached from the front. "Remember," Garrett said quietly, "if they surrender peacefully, we take them alive. But these men are killers. Do not hesitate if they go for weapons. Do not hesitate." The words echoed in Preston's mind as he moved into position, remembering Daniel's face, remembering his own frozen moment. But this time, he pushed the memory aside. He was not that frightened deputy anymore. He was a man who had spent 3 years running and was finally ready to stand still. The arrest happened fast. Garrett called out for the Daltons to surrender, and the brothers' response was immediate gunfire. Preston saw one of them bolt for the back exit, the way Preston was guarding, and he stepped out from cover. "Stop right there," Preston commanded, his gun raised. The outlaw spun, reaching for his weapon, and Preston fired without hesitation. His bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. Preston was on him in seconds, kicking the weapon away and pinning the wounded outlaw to the ground. "Stay down," Preston ordered, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The gunfight lasted less than 2 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the Dalton brothers were dead, having refused to surrender. The other 2, including the one Preston had shot, were wounded but alive. No one from the posse was seriously hurt, though one man had a graze across his arm. Marshal Garrett clapped Preston on the shoulder. "Good work. Clean shooting, controlled. You have done this before." Preston nodded, still processing what had happened. He had not frozen. When the moment came, his training had taken over and he had done what needed to be done. The guilt and fear that had controlled him for so long suddenly seemed less insurmountable. They transported the prisoners back to the county seat, a larger town about 20 miles from Hawthorne. The wounded men were handed over to a doctor under guard while Garrett handled the paperwork. Preston stayed to give his statement, then collected the small reward payment Garrett insisted he take. "You ever want to wear a badge again, you come find me," Garrett said as they parted ways. "I could use a deputy with your skills and judgment." Preston thanked him but made no commitments. He rode back toward Hawthorne through the gathering dusk, exhausted but feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. He had faced danger and not frozen. He had done his job without anyone dying because of his hesitation. It did not erase what had happened to Daniel, but it proved he was not the coward he had believed himself to be. It was nearly midnight when Preston reached Hawthorne. The town was dark and quiet, but a lamp still burned in the window of the Desert Rose. Preston felt a surge of warmth, knowing June had left it burning for him, a beacon guiding him home. He stabled his horse quickly and walked to the hotel, letting himself in with his key. June appeared at the top of the stairs in her nightgown and robe, her hair loose around her shoulders, relief evident on her face. "You are back," she said, hurrying down to meet him. "I heard there was shooting. Are you hurt?" "I am fine," Preston assured her, catching her hands in his. "Everything is fine, better than fine." June searched his face, seeing something there that made her smile. "You did it. You faced what you were afraid of." "I did not freeze," Preston said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "There was a moment, a choice, and I did what I was trained to do. I did not let fear control me. June, I finally feel like maybe I can move past this. Maybe I can be the man Daniel believed I could be." June threw her arms around his neck, holding him tightly. "I am so proud of you," she whispered against his shoulder. Preston wrapped his arms around her waist, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling truly at peace for the first time in memory. When she pulled back slightly to look up at him, he kissed her properly, deeply, pouring 3 years of pent-up emotion into the contact. "I love you," Preston said when they finally broke apart, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I did not think I was capable of feeling this way again, but June, I love you. I want to stay here, build a life here, with you if you will have me." June's eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too. From that very first night when you told me about Daniel, when you let me see your pain and trusted me with your burden, I think I started falling in love with you then. Yes, Preston. Yes to all of it." They stood together in the quiet hotel lobby, holding each other as the lamp flickered beside them. 2 people who had been running from their pasts finally finding a place, and a person to call home. The summer that followed was the happiest time Preston could remember. He continued working at the livery, saving money with a purpose now. He and June were inseparable, spending every free moment together. The town accepted their courtship without much fuss, though Preston caught knowing looks and smiles from various townspeople who seemed pleased to see June happy. In August, Preston used his savings to buy a small piece of land on the edge of town, a few acres with a good water source and enough flat space for building. He worked evenings and Sundays constructing a house, a modest two-room structure that would be theirs. June would come watch him work, bringing water and food, sometimes just sitting and reading aloud while he sawed and hammered. "What are you reading?" Preston asked one afternoon, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Jane Eyre," June replied. "It is a novel by Charlotte Brontë, about a woman who refuses to be diminished by circumstance or society, who insists on being treated as an equal by the man she loves." "Sounds familiar," Preston said with a grin. June threw a small pebble at him playfully. "Are you comparing me to a fictional character, if the shoe fits?" Preston came to sit beside her on the porch steps of what would be their home. "Read me some." June obliged, her voice bringing the story to life, and Preston listened while watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. This, he thought, was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of pain or fear, but the presence of something worth fighting through those things for. In September, Preston asked June to marry him properly. He had bought a simple gold ring from the general store, nothing fancy but solid and real. He waited until evening when they walked by the creek, the place that had become theirs over the long summer. "June Kelly," Preston said, taking her hand and sinking to one knee in the scrubby grass. "You saved my life without ever knowing you were doing it. You gave me a reason to stop running, to face the things I was afraid of, to believe I might deserve a future. I love you more than I have words to express. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" June was crying openly now, nodding before he even finished speaking. "Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at once. They kissed beneath the emerging stars, and Preston felt a completeness he had never known existed. They were married in October at the small church in Hawthorne, with most of the town attending. Preston wore his best clothes, a new shirt June had made for him, and his father's old vest that he had carried in his saddlebags all these years. June wore a simple dress of pale blue that made her eyes luminous, her hair adorned with wildflowers. Sheriff Williams officiated, and as Preston spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish June for all his days, he felt the last shadows of guilt and self-recrimination finally release their hold. He looked into June's shining eyes and saw his future there, bright and full of possibility. The town held a small celebration afterward, with food and music and dancing. Preston danced with his new wife while the townspeople clapped and cheered, and he felt surrounded by community in a way he had not since leaving Silver City. These people had accepted him without knowing his full story, had welcomed him simply because he had proven himself reliable and kind. That night, Preston carried June over the threshold of their new home, the house he had built with his own hands for their future together. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other with patience and joy. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, June traced patterns on Preston's chest. "Tell me what you are thinking," she said softly. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Preston replied honestly. "How different my life could have been if I had not walked out that night in April, if you had not followed me, if you had not convinced me to stay long enough to talk." "I am the lucky one," June countered. You gave me something I did not even know I was missing. A true partner, someone who sees me as an equal, who values my thoughts and dreams, someone who makes me feel less alone. Preston kissed her forehead. Neither of us ever has to be alone again. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Preston still had occasional nightmares about Daniel, nights when he would wake in a cold sweat, reliving that terrible moment. But June was always there, holding him, reminding him of how far he had come, of the good man he was. Gradually, the nightmares came less frequently. June faced her own difficulties. In the spring, she received word through her sister that her father had suffered a stroke. Though he survived, the news stirred up complicated emotions about her estrangement from her family. Preston held her while she cried, letting her process the grief of loving someone who had rejected her. "You want to write to him?" Preston asked gently. June considered for a long time. "I think I do. Not because I expect reconciliation, but because I want him to know I am happy, that my choices led to a good life. Maybe someday he will be ready to accept that." She wrote the letter carefully, telling her father about the hotel, about Hawthorne, about Preston and their marriage. She sent it through her sister and received a response months later. Her father's words were stiff and formal, but he acknowledged her letter and expressed relief that she was well. It was not forgiveness or acceptance, but it was a beginning. In the summer of 1883, June discovered she was pregnant. Preston was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, suddenly hyper-aware of all the ways he could fail as a father. But June's steady confidence helped ground him. "You are going to be a wonderful father," she told him firmly when he voiced his fears. "You are patient, kind, strong, and you know how to love deeply. Our child will be lucky to have you." Their son was born in February of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Daniel Crawford Lawson, honoring the man whose death had sent Preston on the journey that ultimately led him to June and to healing. Holding his son for the first time, Preston felt a profound sense of rightness. This was redemption, not because he had earned it through suffering, but because he had chosen to stop running, to face his pain, to accept love when it was offered. Daniel Crawford had believed Preston could be a good man, a good lawman, and now Preston believed it too. "Hello, Danny," Preston whispered to his sleeping son. "I am going to do my very best by you, I promise." June, tired but radiant, smiled at them both. "We both will." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following years. Preston continued working at the livery, though he also began training horses on the side, a skill he had learned from his father. June ran the Desert Rose with the same competence and warmth that had made it successful, though she cut back her hours after Danny was born, hiring a young woman named Sarah to help with the day-to-day operations. In 1886, their daughter was born, a tiny thing they named Louisa after June's mother. June wrote to her mother about the new baby, including a photograph Preston had paid to have taken in the larger town nearby. Her mother wrote back with tears evident in her ink-smudged words, saying how proud she was, how much she wished she could meet her grandchildren. Preston watched June reading that letter, saw the joy and sorrow mixed in her expression, and made a decision. "We should visit Boston," he said. June looked up, startled. "What? Your mother wants to meet Danny and Louisa. You want to see your mother and sister. Your father may not accept us, but that should not keep you from the family members who do." Preston came to kneel beside her chair. "I have some money saved. We can afford the trip. Let us go this autumn after the heat breaks." June threw her arms around his neck. "Are you certain?" "It is so far and expensive and—" "I am certain," Preston said firmly. "You have given me everything, June. Let me give you this." They made the journey in October, taking the train east with two small children in tow. It was exhausting and chaotic and wonderful. June's mother met them at the train station in Boston with June's younger sister, Margaret, and there were tears and embraces all around. June's father remained distant, refusing to meet with them, but her mother and sister spent every possible moment with June's family. Margaret fell in love with her niece and nephew immediately, and Preston saw how happy it made June to reconnect with the family she had left behind. On their last day in Boston, June's mother pulled Preston aside while June was busy with the children. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for making my daughter so happy, for giving her the life she deserved. I can see how much you love her." "She saved me," Preston replied honestly. "I was lost when I found her, and she showed me the way back to myself. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." They returned to Hawthorne in November, exhausted but satisfied. The trip had given June closure with her past, had allowed her to share her present happiness with the family members who mattered most. Preston felt grateful he could provide that for her. As the years passed, their life together deepened and grew. Danny grew into a bright, curious boy who loved horses as much as his father. Louisa was quieter but equally intelligent, inheriting her mother's love of books and stories. Preston and June added a third child in 1889, another son they named Robert after Marshal Garrett, who had become a friend over the years. The Desert Rose continued to thrive under June's management, becoming something of a local institution. Preston's horse training business grew as well, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase his well-trained mounts. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. In 1891, Preston received an unexpected visit from Marshal Garrett, who had been promoted to territorial marshal. "I have a proposition for you," Garrett said as they sat on Preston's porch, watching the children play in the yard. "I need a deputy marshal, someone I can trust to handle difficult assignments. The pay is good, and you could be based here in Hawthorne, only traveling when necessary. You would wear a badge again." Preston felt his gut clench at the suggestion, old fears rising. But he looked at his children, at the house he and June had built together, at the life he had created, and realized the fear no longer controlled him. "Can I think about it?" Preston asked. "I need to discuss it with June." That night, Preston laid out Garrett's offer to his wife. "I told him I needed to think about it, but June, I realize I want to do this. Not because I have something to prove anymore, but because I know I can do good work, can help people. The guilt over Daniel, it does not rule me anymore. You helped me see that his death was not my fault, that I am capable and brave. I want to honor his memory by being the lawman he believed I could be." June was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Will it be dangerous?" "Sometimes," Preston admitted. But Garrett said most of the work would be tracking down fugitives, investigating crimes, not gunfights, and I would be home most of the time. "Then you should do it," June said firmly. "Not because you need redemption, but because it is work you are good at, work that matters. I trust you to be careful, to come home to us." Preston pulled her close, overwhelmed with love for this woman who understood him so completely. "Have I told you lately that you are the best thing that ever happened to me?" "Not today," June said with a smile, "but you can tell me again." Preston became Deputy Marshal Lawson in early 1892, wearing a badge for the first time in a decade. It felt right in a way it had not before, not a burden of expectation, but a symbol of service. He worked closely with Garrett, handling cases across the territory, and proved himself capable and reliable. The work was sometimes difficult and occasionally dangerous, but Preston never again froze in a critical moment. He had learned to trust himself, to channel fear into focus rather than paralysis. and he always came home to June and their children, to the life they had built together. In 1895, June received word that her father had passed away. She traveled to Boston for the funeral, and Preston went with her, holding her hand through the difficult process of burying a parent she had never fully reconciled with. Her father had left her a small inheritance, an acknowledgment perhaps of her place in the family, even if he had never been able to say so in life. "I wish he could have known you all," June said one night as they prepared to return to Nevada. "I wish he could have seen Danny and Louisa and Robert, seen the life we built. Maybe it would have changed his mind." "Maybe," Preston agreed, "but you did not need his approval to live well, June. You proved that every day." They returned to Hawthorne, to their home and their life, settling back into familiar rhythms. The years continued to roll past, marked by the growth of their children, the deepening of their partnership, the accumulation of small joys and sorrows that made up a well-lived life. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Preston and June stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the Nevada mountains. Danny was 18 now, working as a ranch hand on a nearby spread and courting a blacksmith's daughter. Louisa at 14 was already talking about becoming a teacher, inspired by her mother's love of learning. Robert, 11 years old, showed signs of following his father into law work, endlessly fascinated by Preston's stories. "Can you believe it has been 18 years since we met?" June asked, leaning against Preston's shoulder. "Best 18 years of my life," Preston replied, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Do you remember that first night when you followed me out into the dark?" "I remember thinking you looked like you desperately needed someone to talk to," June said. "Like you were drowning and just needed someone to throw you a rope." "You did more than throw me a rope," Preston said. "You pulled me to shore, dried me off, and taught me how to swim again." "I was so lost, June, buried under guilt and grief and convinced I deserved to suffer. You listened to all of it, years of loneliness and pain I had poured into silence. You took all that poison I had been holding and helped me let it go." June turned to face him fully, her green eyes still as captivating as they had been that first day. "You did the hard work, Preston. You chose to stay, to talk, to face your fears. I just provided a willing ear and a safe space." "That was everything," Preston said intensely. "Before you, I did not think I deserved happiness or peace or love. I had convinced myself that running from town to town, never connecting with anyone, was what I deserved. You showed me that was wrong. You showed me that being human, making mistakes, does not mean we are unworthy of good things." "We saved each other," June said softly. "I was drowning in my own way, in loneliness and feeling like I did not belong anywhere. You gave me partnership, true partnership where I am valued and respected. You gave me a family, a home, a place where I matter not despite being independent but because of it." Preston kissed her tenderly, a kiss that held 18 years of love and partnership and mutual saving. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "If I could go back to that night in April of 1882, Preston said. "If I could tell that broken, lost man what was waiting for him if he just stayed, just talked, just opened his heart to the possibility of healing, I do not think he would have believed me." "Probably not," June agreed with a smile. "But he would have been wrong, because here we are with 3 beautiful children, a life we built together, surrounded by community and purpose. All because one desperate man needed to talk and one lonely woman was willing to listen." "To another 18 years, Preston said, raising an imaginary glass. "To forever," June countered, and they kissed again as the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when 2 wounded souls found each other in the Nevada darkness. Their children's voices drifted from inside the house, calling for dinner, and Preston and June turned to go inside, hands clasped, ready to face whatever came next as they had faced everything for 18 years. Together, equal and deeply, enduringly in love. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted them, replaced instead by the vibrant present and the promising future they had built from honesty, vulnerability, and the simple act of one person truly listening to another.